Hello, and welcome to the first of our 2020 general election virtual candidate forums. If you're on social media, please hit the share button and help all your friends see today's discussion too. My name is William Hatfield. I'm the editor of the Tallahassee Democrat. I will be today's moderator. I'd like to introduce Christine Coble from the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee, right below me. They are our partner in these forums. Before we get started, because it's 2020 and anything that can go wrong will go wrong, we ask that you bear with us through any technical difficulties we may have today. We're here today with candidates for Leon County Commission, District 4. The incumbent is Bryan Desloge and his opponent is Brian Welch. Here's how things will work. We will rotate between which candidate gets to answer each question first. We're going to ask you to keep your answers to about 90 seconds for most questions. Other questions will have a specific time in which I'll tell you. I'll keep time, and if you run out of time, the alarm will sound. This is what it's going to sound like. We ask that you finish your sentence so we can move on at that point. In the middle of the forum, we will also have a lightning round when we ask you to keep your answers to just a sentence. And by sentence, you know, that is usually like yes and or yes because, you know, but hopefully not one of those run-on sentences. If you, the viewers, have questions for the candidates, I'd say type them into the comments and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Please only use questions we can ask to both candidates. If none of our candidates have any questions before we start, we will jump in and start with the first question. Any questions, candidates?
Nope.
No,
Let's
sir.
do this. All right, Commissioner, we're going to start with you today. Over the weekend, Tallahassee made headlines nationwide for its response to a protest involving about 100 people. Police, many in riot gear, outnumbered protesters, and 15 people were arrested in a chaotic scene caught on video and photos. Reaction has been coming in from around the nation. Some see it as an appropriate application of law and order. Others say it was an unnecessary, massive show of force, unlike anything Tallahassee has seen in the past. Do you think the response was appropriate? And is there anything you'd have liked to see differently? And Commissioner, you have 90 seconds on this.
Thanks. No, I talked to the sheriff a little while ago. I kept up with the videos over the weekend. I think my job's health, safety, and welfare, and my goal was to make sure we got through the weekend with everybody being safe, and we met that goal, and I'm real proud of that. I'm not the sheriff is a separate constitutional officer. He's elected, I'm elected, so we are peers. He's not my subordinate. I can't dictate terms. They understand what is necessary. After having had the incident a week or 10 days ago where we had a gun being waved in a protest, we were on high alert and we took this very seriously. And I think the police, based on what I saw, showed an awful lot of restraint. The protesters absolutely have the right to peacefully protest however they'd like to. But the reality was we arrested people that broke the law. And that's the way the system works. And I think most of the people here in town would like to feel that there's some level of law and order. And that I think the sheriff and the police chief acted appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
Yeah, excuse me, guys. I've been in the classroom for a week and I've lost my voice a little bit, so I'm coughing. I apologize. I agree with Commissioner Desloge. I think that the response was appropriate given the situation. I think that we put our law enforcement officers in a very difficult position. I understand that they were expecting counter protesters potentially to come into town, and that's why they showed up in the riot gear and all that stuff. And again, we put law enforcement in a very difficult situation to try and balance people's right to protest and to protect everybody and provide safety. And I think after last weekend's events where we had the potential for a very tragic situation to unfold, our TPD stepped in and prevented that. And I think they're to be commended for that. And so unfortunately what happened this past weekend is not the result you want, but you know, we have to respect and support our law enforcement if we're going to maintain order. So there has to be a balance. I consider myself a reasonable person, and I feel like balance is the most appropriate thing that we can provide in any context. And you're going to hear me repeat that over and over throughout this forum. And so I think that we put the police department in a difficult spot, but they did the best they could in those circumstances. And everybody has a right to protest, but you have to obey the laws of the city. And if you're asked to do something by a law enforcement officer, you need to comply as best you can. And our law enforcement officers will do the best they can.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, staying with you, the curfew enacted by the county has taken criticism that the real reason behind it, the imminent grand jury report, was not made public initially. Do you think that the curfew has been effective? Do you have any regrets about the way it was rolled out? And do you think it should be extended past this week? And you have 1 minute on this.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if the curfew was effective or not. I don't think it should be extended. I think that the people who were in charge, if the sheriff truly felt like it was needed, then I support him in applying a curfew. But we have to understand that curfews hurt our business community. They need to be explained. There needs to be an abundance of communication about why we're employing such a tactic. Is it really necessary? There was mixed messaging coming from the county commission on that, whether or not it was because of the rash of shootings that we've had or because of the potential for violent protests. So I think that I would not support in continuing the curfew unless there was some legitimate and reasonable explanation as to why it's necessary.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
Okay. First of all, setting the curfew lies on my shoulders as chairman. So it was not a county commission decision. And I communicated directly. The sheriff asked me specifically, would we put it in place? I will tell you that there were a number of city commissioners for the last 6 or 8 weeks have intermittently asked for a curfew. There's 3 ways you can do this. The city could do a curfew, which is problematic because it's city, county, where are the boundaries? And the sheriff can actually do a curfew. The problem is his is very severe. You've got no gun sales, no ammo sales, and no concealed weapons, which we felt like was way overkill. The sheriff 3 or 4 weeks ago, when we had a rash of shootings, said, no, not appropriate. They had what we consider credible threats last week that as a result of the altercation where the gentleman waved the gun, that both sides wanted to raise the game and get into a little bit more of an altercation. My job's the safety of the community. So I made the decision with input, obviously, because the sheriff wrote me a formal letter, my county administrator, my county attorney, and we made the decision that it was appropriate. I will tell you right now,
Right.
Talk to the sheriff, we're not going to extend it.
Okay. Thank you. Staying on this, the curfew and staying with you, Mr. Commissioner, at least one prominent restaurant and bar owner has publicly said that the curfew is absolutely painful and hurts business. What is your message to business owners? In 30 seconds on this, please.
My role is safety in the community, and I have to apologize as a prior business owner. It's tough, and I wish I had a better answer for them, but I can't create a safe system that's going to meet everybody's needs in this case. And it's unprecedented times. We're trying to make do in this environment and do the best we can.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
My message to the business community would be that we support them and we want to do everything we can to allow them to be successful. So, again, when we employ curfews, we have to, at the very minimum, communicate abundantly, overly communicate why it's necessary. And we had a curfew back, I believe, in April or early on during COVID. And I understand the reasoning behind those curfews, but we have to communicate with the business community as to when we're going to cut back on that or how long it's going to last. We have to just be reasonable and provide them as much opportunity to succeed as possible. I know times are unprecedented, but we owe them that.
All right. We are now going to turn things over to the League of Women Voters for the next question.
Thank you. The city and Leon County recently approved changes to the comprehensive plan that clears the way to develop an additional 2,800 acres of the Wolani Plantation. What is your position with respect to the track the city and Blueprint are on regarding development within this area, including impacts on the environmental and existing neighborhoods the I-10 exchange, and whether public input has been meaningfully sought and factored into the project.
Who's up?
Mr. Welch.
Yes, thank you, Christine. I'm very concerned about the Welaunee property. As somebody who lives off of North Centerville Road, I share in the concerns of the residents along this corridor. I think there are some red flags that have popped up in the course of the process of transmitting the comp plan amendments. I find it very difficult to understand how we can apply a sense of urgency to something that's been going on for 20 years and will go on for 20 more years. I think it is very fair for citizens to complain about the process that was involved, the lack of real-time public input during a pandemic. I think that is a big concern. Development and growth in Northeast Tallahassee is, I think, the biggest issue facing this campaign. And when you look at Welaunee, you're talking about a major development that's going to have huge impacts on Leon County going forward for many years. And we've gotten off to not a very auspicious start with the canopy development in terms of environmental impacts. So I would make it a priority to engage with citizens on anything that we do with Welaunee, and certainly everything when it comes to the environmental impacts, the roads, where they go, the infrastructure, and all of those things. We have to do better in communicating and engaging with folks on that development.
Commissioner Desloge.
Sure. So you have to understand, historically, this started 30 years ago when the city entered into a development agreement with the landowner. There is no land developer. And over the last 30 years, there have been a lot of back and forth. So last year, it was September, so it was a year ago now. They made the decision, this land was outside of the city inside the city limits, but outside the urban service area. No other property in the county is that way. There is no rural designation for city property. All of the planners looked at it and said it makes common sense. We started public outreach in September of last year. We had open houses, we had signs, we had mailers, and only when COVID hit did it heat up and become an issue with lack of public input. So since the last comp plan meeting, we have had 11 charrettes where we invited the public in and let them ask whatever questions were deemed necessary to the planning staff and to some of the leadership in this. I think we've bent over backwards based on what the pandemic allows us. There is no rush or urgency here other than the fact that the landowner is quietly trying to make some plans for their future. And they have every right. It will not be developed probably in my lifetime. And frankly, it's the kind of thing it's the master plan. In this case, we've only had 2 other master plan communities, which are Southwood and Canopy. And this is our ability to do that. Otherwise, this will turn into like a lot of the growth in the Northeast, which has been pell-mell. And this is an effort to try and slow that down and manage the process a little bit. So I think the public input has changed. Governing Magazine just recently came out with an article that said, frankly, having these type of forums opens the world up to a lot of people that wouldn't have otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay.
One quick one sentence follow up from each of you, staying with you, Commissioner Desloge. Are you open to potentially having more public input sessions, or have we done it
on this issue?
On this issue,
certainly, it'll continue to have public input. I mean, this is not a moment in time. I mean, what's going to happen is if we do the transmittal, then we go into the next phase, which includes the public even more. So to say that we haven't, yeah, absolutely. The process involves the public.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Welch, same follow-up really quick.
Yeah, I think we need to do more. I don't see why we transmitted the comp plan amendments when we did. We acknowledge it's unprecedented times. I don't think that, the public interest needs to be determined, or land use needs to be determined based on what's good for the owner of a property either.
All right. Back to you, Christine, with the League of Women Voters.
Should the public be allowed to participate in online meetings in real time? And what is preventing it from happening now? And will you commit to making this happen if you are elected?
Is that for me?
Yep.
Yes, I will commit to making that happen if I'm elected. I don't understand why it can't be done now. I'm a classroom teacher and I have 30 kids zooming into my class every single day, and I give live instruction to them. So it is possible. I know that at the levels of the county commission, we can get that done. There really is no excuse. We should be doing everything possible. People can WebEx in. There are programs where you can take real-time public input, even if it's via a Zoom or a WebEx or some other platform. It absolutely can be done, and it should be a priority.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge?
Sure. I will tell you, I called the first blueprint meeting a few weeks after this really started, and having 12 elected officials on a WebEx type, Zoom type of call between transparency issues, sunshine issues, technology issues was a huge concern for the lawyers and for the IT people. So we've managed to get through with as much public input as we can possibly take. I will tell you, at our next board meeting, we are going to take live phone calls for the public hearings. I'll also tell you, I sat in the courtroom virtually for 6 hours a couple of weeks ago representing the county. And with the judge and the county attorney and myself, we got porn bombed at the middle of the meeting. And so there are some logistics that don't come into play when it's a germane group. When it's elected officials, there's lots of issues relative to sunshine and to transparency. And it's absolutely, we need to do better. I think we've done a great job actually with what we've been given.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Desloge, we're staying with you, and this is a minute and 30-second answer, if you so choose. Since August 21st, we've had 7 shooting incidents with 2 people dead, including an innocent bystander, and a dozen people injured, including a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old. Certainly, many of these were in Tallahassee, but in the Tallahassee, jurisdiction, but certainly also within Leon County. Also, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a man pull a gun during an altercation at a protest. And we've seen a high-profile case where 2 white business owners fired shots after incorrectly assuming a black family returning a U-Haul were thieves. What do all of these incidents tell you about where our community is right now and what needs to be done?
Well, first of all, we have a gun violence problem in our community, and there's no trying to minimize that or look the other way. From a county perspective, which is where I sit, the sheriff is a constitutional elected officer, so I can't dictate terms. I work with him every day, as do I with the chief of police. I will tell you, there are a couple of things, though, that we can do as a community. And you look at things like housing, and you look at things like jobs. These are the kinds of things that we can make a difference. I helped as a citizen in the Frenchtown area get the old Ebony Gardens transferred into what is now Goodbread Hills. And then we put the Renaissance Center in the middle of what was Frenchtown for myself as a child. Frenchtown has become eminently more safe and eminently more livable for the majority of the people in the community. That's the long-term type of thing. We're working on housing on the south side. The other piece is jobs. People need to have a job to cut down on some of this. And frankly, the OEV has sales tax dollars assigned to job creation and economic development in our community. We were the first county in the state to put that on the ballot, and we have kind of led the way with that. And we've got about $7 or $8 million a year that we spend in an effort to generate economic development and more jobs in our community. So the county's role, I can't go out and police because we're not in the law enforcement business. That's the sheriff's job and the police chief's job. We work with them every day and we support them. I will tell you, there's a whole nother issue with criminal justice, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point in the future. But
thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
Yeah, obviously we have a violence, a crime problem in Leon County and Tallahassee, and there's no I say silver bullets, probably a poor choice of words, but there's no single easy way to solve that problem. It's going to take a concerted effort by everybody involved, the faith-based community, our economic development community, our affordable housing, nonprofits. I think the Children's Services Council will play a big role in improving the outcomes associated with crime as we deal with young people and sort of meet them where they are and provide them with alternatives and options. As a high school teacher, I work with young people every day, and I know that they're in a very vulnerable position in a lot of cases. And so we've got to do better in intervening and applying funding where we can. I think we cannot rest on the idea that we've fixed this problem in the past with infrastructure in those communities and things like that. We have to get on the ground and meet people where they are and figure out what's going on, because obviously there's a problem. There is a gap in the coverage. We've got to do better. The sheriff has done a good job partnering with the faith-based community. I think the chief of police has instituted some programs at the city that have worked, and I think we got to keep doing that. Perhaps engage with Lively and do some workforce development programs, allow kids an optional pathway to a high-paying career, and all of those things collectively should work out and hopefully have an impact.
Thank you. A 1 minute follow up, and we're starting with you, Mr. Welch. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement and unrest around the nation has led to plenty of soul searching among businesses, organizations, and government. What, if anything, should the county be doing to better in response to their rallying cry for equality, justice, and police reform, both at this time and going forward? Mr. Welch.
Yeah, I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is an important moment in history. I'm a history teacher. I think that it's important to acknowledge that historically Black lives have not mattered as much in our country, whether we talk about slavery or Jim Crow or the civil rights era. This is another moment in which we must acknowledge that Black lives matter. And it's important for people in leadership positions to say that. Now, as far as the county goes, I'm not exactly an expert on everything that goes on at the county level. So I don't know how we could potentially fund programs to assist social justice movements. I don't think I would support spending taxpayer dollars painting social justice murals into intersections. I think that's just a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. I almost think it's just a disservice. If we want to support nonprofits that help out folks in the community, if we want to, as a county, as a government, as people in leadership positions, to scream from the mountaintops that Black lives do matter, and we're going to do what we can. But the county doesn't control what goes on at TPD nor what goes on at the sheriff's department. So I think we support those folks. We try to find ways to meet people where they are. We've got to do a better job of communicating.
All right. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
We have a certain amount of what we would consider discretionary money, which we spend on issues like health and human services in our community. The funding has remained pretty much constant for the last 9 years. The other thing I'll come back to, though, it comes down to systematic longer-term changes like jobs and like housing. And those are the areas that from a county we can actually have an impact on. So we're looking at the South Side housing right now. We're talking to a number of different people about, can we improve that? Can we upgrade that? Can we retrofit it or come in and scrape it and make it better, which makes the neighborhood safer, which makes the community safer? Can we do the same thing with jobs? And so we're looking at out there trying to figure out within the parameters of OEV, can we get more people employed or get more people off the street? I think housing and jobs are the things that we can do. But as was pointed out, really from a law enforcement standpoint, it's a little bit out of our swim lane.
Thank you. We're going back to the League of Women Voters for the next question.
This is first for you, Commissioner. Leon County is home to the highest poverty zip code in the state. What would you do as a county commissioner to alleviate poverty within the county, including within the 32304 zip code? Commissioner.
Great question. A lot of people don't realize that 32304 is the highest poverty in the state. And there's ways you can talk about it, but you can't get away from it. We convened a summit 6 months, 8 months ago before COVID to talk a little bit about how we could address that. And I think it comes back to my earlier comments, which are we need to improve the housing opportunities. We need to improve the job opportunities. And that particular area needs a lot of focus. It's a fringe student area. It's Jimbo Jackson's primary area, and it's a rural, impoverished area. So we're trying to figure out, is there a better way we can make sure people are employed and that people have appropriate housing?
Thank you. Mr. Welch?
I think the key is economic development. We've got to find good jobs. I mean, high paying, not necessarily even high paying, just good, steady career type jobs. So I think that there's a couple of things. The Children's Services Council, again, dedicated funding to intervene in folks when they're young, to give support to parents and families in the ALICE population, that working poor population. And then we, job training programs through Lively. I don't know why we don't take bigger advantage of Lively Technical College, which is a great resource in our community to really train people in a relatively short amount of time. So if you combine Children's Services Council funding, let's say you have a single mother who can get afternoon care, and in the afternoon or the evening, she can go to Lively and learn a new skill, learn a nursing skill or some other skill, or a father learn a welding skill. You do that in a relatively short amount of time, you can change somebody's life and change somebody's outcomes. So education and economic development go hand in hand. If we're going to recruit jobs and new industries into the county, we've got to educate people to work in those jobs. And those two things singularly can really move the needle, I think, in producing better outcomes for folks in the working poor and the poverty-stricken populations, not just in the 32304, but all over our county.
Mr. Welch will stay with you for a follow-up. Do you believe that within Leon County, there is disparity in various sectors, such as quality education, employment, and housing? And if so, in what sectors, and how would you address it?
I think that there is a proliferation of economic or socioeconomic and educational segregation in our community, and that's not a secret. I think that's been going on a long time. We've acknowledged that we have one of the most educationally segregated school districts in Florida, frankly, and you have drastically different outcomes at the different schools in the city. I think that starts with building really quality schools in the areas of town where you want to see differences in outcomes. And I think for far too long in Leon County, we have let our Southside schools really just sit there and languish while continually investing in our North Side schools, whether it be facilities. You look at Childs High School where I work, which is a big, beautiful facility, which is now 20 years old, by the way. And then you see the investments that the superintendent of schools is making at Rickards High School and Fairview Middle School. I think those types of investments will have long-term impacts on improving some of the educational and economic segregation that we have in the community. But obviously, again, we've got this tale of two Tallahassees, and there's a part of town who lives relatively well, and there's a part of town that doesn't. And I think that the northeast part of town, where we have affluence, has a role to play in engaging with and improving the quality of life of folks all over the community. And ultimately, that rising tide will lift all ships. But Northeast Tallahassee has to have somebody fighting for it.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Yeah, as was pointed out, there's absolutely an economic and educational segregation. And I'll come back to people need to have valid, good employment, and there needs to be jobs out there, and there needs to be more housing for the people on the south side and the west side. It's not going to, but money is not the only answer. We get asked all the time, how come you don't spend more money on the south side or the west side? The reality is there's actually more money being spent, almost 2-to-1 south of Tennessee Street in Leon County, if you look at infrastructure and things like that. But we're going to continue doing that, but it needs the whole community. The faith-based community needs to step up. The business community needs to step up. Government is not going to solve all the ills in our community. And frankly, the South Side has been a perennial problem, and it needs to be dealt with. Frankly, I hear the story about open houses at some of the South Side school where nobody shows up, or a PTA meeting, there's 2 people. And that's not a government solvable problem, but we need to figure out, how do we make sure people are employed, and how do we make sure that people get housed better and that they can up their standard of living in the south side and on the west side. And as was pointed out, the Northeast is fairly affluent, but they can't answer all the questions, and money is not the only answer.
Thank you. All right, we're going to turn our questions to a series of questions on the coronavirus. Commissioner Desloge, how would you assess the joint city-county response to the coronavirus so far? Where are we now? What do we need to do better?
I think
1 minute.
Thanks, William. I think we've done a spectacular job considering what we were given. We enacted the mask mandate well in advance. We were the first county in the state well in advance of many of the other counties. We did the stay-at-home order well in advance, and with a lot of criticism. Could we have done some things better? Certainly. There's been some flaws in the system we've looked at. Having a local health department director, we have a health department director who is a rock star, but she reports to the Surgeon General, and one size doesn't fit all. So having somebody locally that could help us navigate some of that would have been a big plus. If we were to do this all over again and could, read the tea leaves and see what's coming down the pipe. I think generally we've done an outstanding job by getting in front of the curve and trying to figure out how to fix this.
Thank you. Mr. Welch?
I think that the county commission has done a pretty good job in regards to coronavirus. I've said from the beginning that I supported and do support the mask mandate. I think it's had a pretty tangible impact on the number of cases and the reduction of hospitalizations and things like that. I think that we've fallen short in supporting our business community. I know that we spent some blueprint money to try and prop up some businesses early on, but that's been 4 or 5 months ago. I know we've got some Leon Cares federal funding that's available now to try and prop them up, but we have left a lot of businesses, specifically in the hospitality and restaurant industry, to languish. And I think when you combine that with the governor's orders of capacity limitations, which I think is a whole nother argument in and of itself, considering they haven't had a cabinet meeting in 6 months, I think that the mask mandate has been effective, but I also think that we need to message very strongly when we expect that to come down. We owe it to the business community and the restaurant and hospitality industry to let them know what is the threshold for bringing that down. When do we get to that point where we can let them thrive again?
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we're going to stay with you for that a follow-up on that topic. Is how effective has the enforcement been on the mask mandate? And do you think it should be reviewed or repealed? I mean, do you see it being repealed before a vaccine is widely available? Mr. Welch. 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the enforcement is probably non-existent as far as I can tell. I think, again, a lot of the credit towards the effectiveness of that goes to just regular citizens wearing masks and being responsible. I think that I would hope it would be repealed sooner rather than later, or at least to some extent pulled back, so that we can help those businesses that are struggling.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
So I resisted the mask mandate in the early stages when a number of the other commissioners felt like it was appropriate. But when we put it in place, I feel like we've had a pretty dramatic impact if you look at the way our numbers have trended generally. And the fact that our numbers have trended in the right direction just until recently with the students back in town, I think is an indication of the mask mandate helping. It's very difficult to enforce, and we did not want to turn this into a criminal type of thing. So self-enforcement and basically, I hate to say it, but shaming in the community has turned into kind of one of the few ways we can further that.
Do you plan on reviewing or repealing it, and do you see it being repealed before a vaccine is widely available?
I will tell you, we review it almost. I'm in the county administrator's office every day. We talk every day, and I talk to the health department director 2 or 3 times a week. So it's under constant review. I think the repeal, I think we're in for a longer ride than people are aware of. And I think, frankly, this may be the norm for a while going forward. As painful as that is, and I agree, the business impact is paramount. We've got a healthcare crisis that has spawned an economic crisis and a small business crisis. So let's solve the healthcare crisis and let's move on and solve the business crisis.
Thank you. Staying with you on the next question, another 30-second one. Commissioner, large gatherings continue to be a problem. I think a photo right now is bouncing around on social media of a large pool party at an off-campus apartment. Are we doing enough to enforce guidelines on that front, or is voluntary compliance the best way? Commissioner Desloge.
To the best of our ability. I mean, there is no specific ordinance that says law. I mean, there's recommendations from the Surgeon General. There's recommendations from the governor's office about large groups, and we're trying to the best of our ability to make sure that that's the case. You've got 70,000 college kids coming back into town that, frankly, they're going to try and get together. We're trying to separate them as best we can. It's not a perfect situation, and I think, frankly, up until this point, we've done a pretty good job of managing the process.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
Well, I think that the college kids are going to do what they're going to do. I think between FSU and the colleges and all the kids coming back and school starting back up, I'm really afraid that we're going to have some more outbreaks, and that's not helping anybody. Obviously, that's not helping the business community, and that's not helping the public health care crisis. I think that, unfortunately, anytime you mandate those kinds of things, you're just hoping, and hope is not a strategy, and it is a difficult situation. So we've got to hold those folks accountable to some extent, whether that be the property managers need to go and break up those pool parties, or the FSU PD needs to go in there and break up those pool parties. there has to be a mechanism to hold those young folks, those college kids, accountable.
All right. We are going back to the League of Women Voters for the next topic.
Thank you. What do you think the county should do to ensure access to affordable health care? And do you support continued funding for the county's primary health care program? That's $1.8 million that serves the underinsured. And I believe we start with you, Mr. Welch.
Yes, ma'am. I support any efforts to uphold, excuse me, to support healthcare funding. I support the continuing funding for the county's primary healthcare program. I think that adequate healthcare sort of plugs a lot of holes in your community that makes people vulnerable, as we are experiencing right now. Things like pandemics and disease and obesity and high blood pressure, those types of things affect our poverty-ridden community at a higher percentage than they do our more affluent community. And so, yeah, I would totally support that as long as it can be budgeted responsibly. I don't think we need to be raising taxes, obviously, right now. And then with COVID, we're going to have some budgetary hits. But again, I'm not an expert on the budgeting process at the county level. And I would like to think that we would make that a priority, because I think if you don't make that a priority, then that's going to sort of leak into other problems and cost you more money down the road. So preventative care and primary health care support, I think, is very, very important, especially to our population, which we acknowledge is one of the poorest in the state in that 32304 area code.
Thank you. Commissioner, same question.
Yeah, no, we've supported, and I'll continue to support the funding, the healthcare funding that runs to our budget. It's in what would be considered discretionary. So the one thing we have done, which I think has made a difference, is we figured out a way to leverage that money on a 6-to-1 basis. So we spend $1.8 million. I think we've seen almost $6 for every dollar we've spent of other funding, whether it be grants or federal programs or other ways we can leverage what we've done in a creative way to make sure we put more money in that pipe. I come from the healthcare environment, and it is a problem for people that cannot get access to healthcare. And frankly, I think we've done a good job of that, and we'll continue supporting that.
All right. Thank you. Commissioner, we're staying with you. You obviously will be on the November ballot. So will the Children's Services Council. Do you support the creation of a Children's Services Council? And if not, how would you go about addressing children's issues in the county?
So I'll start with yes, I will vote for it. I will tell you, though, that a year ago when it came up before us, I was the one who asked to have a study done, have some citizens come together and give us an idea of what it's going to be spent on, how it's going to be spent, a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak. Judge Sherstrom did a spectacular job bringing everybody together and managing that. I still have questions. I'm going to support it. I can tell you that the devil's in the details, but I think any money we can spend, because childhood poverty and these children issues in 0 to 5, I chaired the Early Learning Coalition 6, 8, 10 years ago, and I watched, and I became a believer that 0 to 5 for these children is critical in the success. And so if we want to start bending the curve and changing things, that's where we need to spend our money. So I expect that we'll play a vital role, the county will, in partnership with the Children's Services Council as they come up and get established.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
I also support the Children's Services Council. I've supported it since I first read their white paper, or sort of discussing what the goals were. As an educator, I'm familiar with the benefits of early childhood education and the really, really positive outcomes you get when you make inputs and impacts on young people. I think the Children's Services Council, I do have caution because it is a tax on the property, on property owners. However, it's a referendum. So people have the option. I myself will vote for it, and I'm okay paying that tax, but I would not necessarily want to just be the one that decides that. I am okay with giving it to the voters and letting them decide. And I think in Leon County, they probably will support it. But I think that right there can have a tremendous impact across all kinds of issues in our county, whether it be poverty, whether it be crime, whether it be our working poor population. The Children's Services Council, if implemented the way that it is designed and has been utilized in other counties, I think will have a tremendous impact on outcomes of young people in our county and our county overall. And I, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, would love to be the county commission appointee to the Children's Services Council. As I understand, the county commission will have one commissioner on there.
Thank you. A follow-up on that, and I'm staying with you, Mr. Welch. Opponents, many of who live in your district, say the referendum comes at a pretty bad time with the coronavirus pandemic. They also say it would let unelected council members tax residents millions of dollars without telling us clearly how the money is spent. What's your response to those critics? 30 seconds.
I think that there will be elected officials that serve on the Children's Services Council. I don't think that when it was derived, anybody anticipated that COVID was going to happen. So I think that's just a correlation that doesn't necessarily apply. It is on the referendum. So I think if people really are strongly against it, they can vote against it. It's not like any individual or any body, any single elected body is putting this forth, and there will be accountability. I mean, the governor of the state appoints 4 people, and the city and the county have a seat, and the school board, the superintendent has a seat on it. So there are elected people on there that it should be accountable, hopefully.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
Well, I think people need to understand it's a tax, and let's not dress it up any other way it is. It is a tax, and it's going to set up a different body of people that will have administrative costs and overhead. And it was the questions I had a year ago when it came in front of us, and I asked, give us some detail, give us more, a little bit of meat on the bones. I understand why people would be hesitant, and to take it down means going back out to another referendum. I flew down to Miami on my nickel and met with Dave Lawrence, who is considered kind of the godfather of children's services councils around the state. He helped put the legislation in place that allows you to do it. And I spent a couple of hours with him, and I've met with him numerous times since then. And we don't agree on everything, but he's done a spectacular job in Dade County trying to get in front of that. So to the earlier comment, the place where the poverty is the most prevalent is childhood poverty. And if we can't get in front of that with this money, then shame on us.
And we actually have got a 30-second follow-up on that has come from Facebook. A Facebook viewer asks, what can the county specifically do to improve early childhood developmental services, particularly for high-risk groups? Commissioner Desloge, 30 seconds.
Well, in the Health and Human Services, we have certain funding sources where we go through CHSP. Some of that money ends up in children-related services. I'll tell you, as past chair of the Early Learning Coalition, there's $20 million in our area, regional area, that goes out for early learning, for the children. It's basically subsidizing the childcare. And so the county's role is somewhat limited. And I'll come back to my earlier comment was we need to build an environment where people can prosper, where they've got jobs and they've got adequate housing and they've got some hope and they've got things to look forward to. And it's not money solves that overnight.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, same question.
I think that there, like the commissioner said, that there's a limited amount of impact that the county can have in terms of its tax dollars on early childhood education. And I think a dedicated pot of money targeted specifically at gaps or holes that the nonprofit community and or the government community can't fill should have a tremendous impact on those outcomes. And so I think the Children's Services Council, in its existence and its ability to have funds dedicated to those causes, are what we're trying to leverage, I guess, to fill those holes. Other than that, I don't know to what extent the county has money budgeted specifically for early childhood education.
Thank you. All right. Changing gears here, staying with you, Mr. Welch. This is a nonpartisan race, but these days partisan politics are unavoidable. On the political spectrum, from extreme liberal to extreme conservatism and everything in between, where would you define yourself? This is also a presidential election, so it is a fair question to ask which top of the candidate ticket you're supporting. Mr. Welch, 1 minute.
Thanks, William. I would consider myself a moderate, a pragmatist, but I am a Democrat, and I will be supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for the presidential election. I am not a fan of President Trump's rancor, his demeanor, his lack of decency causes big problems and consternation for me. I think we can debate the policies, but I don't necessarily think we can debate the lack of decency and the lack of sort of upholding the values of American citizens in terms of the way he speaks and talks and treats people. And that's one of the most important things to me. I think we can also debate the policies of Vice President Biden and Senator Harris, but that's where I'll be.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
Sure. I would be considered a moderate conservative, Republican for the majority of my adult life. I will tell you, from having been past president of the National Association of Counties, past president of the Florida Association of Counties, and having been a commissioner for 14 years, that local politics are not partisan, nor should they be partisan. Potholes know no jurisdictional boundaries. People, we solve problems, and 80% of the services that everybody in our world gets come from the city commission, the county commission, and the school board. We're the face of government, and to try and politicize what we do. So my comment would be, you vote and you vote your conscience, and I would leave it at that.
And in terms of the top of the ticket?
I would say you vote and you vote your conscience, as I'll do, and as I always do.
All right. Now we are shifting over to the lightning round. As I alluded to earlier, the lightning round is a question, oftentimes a yes or no, or a one that can have a pretty simple answer. We are looking for one sentence. Yes, you can add an and, add a because to explain, but we are looking for one sentence. Commissioner, we're going to start with you. If you had to depend on one source for coronavirus guidance, who or what would it be?
CDC.
Very good. Mr. Welch.
I would depend on the local health department and the CDC.
All right. Mr. Welch, what letter grade would you give the governor on the coronavirus response and why?
Oh, I would say maybe a C. I think the governor has kind of rushed things and is applying politics to the coronavirus response. I know as a school teacher. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Commissioner Desloge, same question.
I'd say B minus. He's allowed local government to manage more things, which makes a difference because one size does not fit all.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, staying with you, are there any limits on who you will accept campaign contributions from?
The law is very clear. You can only accept certain contribution limits.
Thank you. Mr. Welch?
I would prefer not to receive bundled contributions from local insiders and developers and people who have the handful of people that have the ability to do that. I think it sends the wrong message, even though it's not legal. I'm sorry, lightning round, my bad.
Yep. No, that's good.
Not illegal. Sorry, not illegal.
This may be a hypothetical or real. Mr. Welch, would you send your school-age children to brick and mortar or digital schooling, and why?
I actually have sent 2 to brick and mortar and 1 to digital, and I think it depends on the family and depends on the kids. In my case, I have kids that can't handle it and some that can.
All right, Commissioner Desloge.
Same answer. I think, you've got a choice from full-blown brick and mortar to full-blown virtual and somewhere in between. The 3 college presidents and the superintendent have decided that a somewhere in between, and I think it's a personal choice based on where your children are in their education process and where your level of safety is.
All right, Commissioner, the commission has recently dialed back its meetings to once a month. Do you agree with that, and why?
Yes, and I will tell you that I have approximately 60 meetings a month that are spinoffs from specific county commission responsibilities. We hold the right to have a second meeting every month, and I will tell you, last year, under the 1 a month scenario, we will have the same amount of meetings as we had last year or more.
Thank you.
Staff analysis. So,
Mr. Welch?
Go ahead.
I think that we should not have rolled back to 1 meeting a month. I think in this time, like we've covered already, it's drastically important that we stay in touch with the people we serve.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, name a county ordinance or policy that should be immediately repealed.
Oh, goodness. Can't name one.
Okay. Commissioner Desloge.
We're citizen driven. If there's something to be repealed, we would have done it. I will tell you, we have a bold goal of 500 new citizen driven initiatives. So call us if you think we can do something different.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, name one specific thing the county is not spending enough money on and one thing the county may be spending too much money on.
We spend not enough money on water quality issues, specifically south side septic versus sewer, but there's a limited amount of money we can spend. We spend too much money on criminal justice. The criminal justice system and county government across the country is seriously broken. It's a mental health holding. We spend $45 million a year to house, feed, clothe, and medicate
Thank you.
about 1,100 inmates in our local jail.
Same question, Mr. Welch.
I think that the big pot of money now is in the blueprint, and I have serious concerns about where that money is spent and how it's vetted. So that would be where we spend too much in the wrong places, and then where we spend not enough, probably on healthcare and indigent population support in the 32304.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, do you support the decriminalization and or legalization of marijuana?
Yeah, I would support the decriminalization of marijuana. I don't necessarily see how that benefits us, and I think it creates a huge burden on our criminal justice system.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge.
Yes, and I would say as a big proponent of home rule, I've been Washington, Alaska, California, Colorado, looking at the way they dealt with it at the local level, and it's a patchwork quilt. And for local governments to have different opinions, and yes, national decriminalization would go a long way.
All right, and last lightning round question. What is the single biggest thing you've done in the community to make the county a better place to live? Commissioner Desloge.
15 years ago, before I actually started with the county, I helped start Village Square, which still goes on today. I'm Catholic, conservative, Republican. Alan Katz is Jewish, liberal, Democrat. With Bill Law, who's a good friend of ours, the three of us effectively started Village Square. We're in Pinellas, Broward, California, Utah, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Kansas. It's a great idea that we need to do more with. It's a way to have a civil debate.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Welch, same question.
My 14 years as a classroom teacher has afforded me the opportunity to participate in all kinds of activities and raise funds. And I started a foundation at Childs High School. I've collected a lot of cans at canned food drives for Second Harvest. So all of those opportunities to participate in the community have been a big blessing, and I'd like to think I've contributed.
Thank you. All right, we are in the home stretch. I think we've got about 2.5 questions before it is closing arguments where you get to speak directly to voters. The next question, this is a 1-minute answer. How should the county balance the need for economic growth with the needs of long-term residents who don't want the landscape and character of the community to change? Mr. Welch.
Again, as I mentioned early on, I think balance is extremely important. I do not think that we can continue to press development in Northeast Tallahassee. I think it's going to create big imbalances and problems. We're going to have school problems. We're going to have infrastructure problems. We already have infrastructure problems. And then that comes at the detriment of other parts of the county that we need to develop. So we've got to find balance in that economic development. And if you currently live in Northeast Tallahassee, you see that that development and growth is really the brunt of that is being borne by folks who live out here. And that's a problem. We got to fix that.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge.
I would say in the last 40 years, you've seen in the Northeast this explosion because it's good schools, great area to live. I've spent the last 14 years correcting a lot of the ills of the prior. When I moved to Bradfordville, when my first child was born, we had a 2-lane road going out to the Sing store and the Moby Dick's, and that was it. So now we've got Bannerman Crossing, which has some of the best restaurants in the town. We've got a 4-lane road that runs out to Thomasville. We're 4-laning Bannerman Road as far as Tequesta and plans to go further. So infrastructure and follow-up, I've got $40 million worth of projects I can identify solely that I helped put in the Northeast in an effort to try and stop this or fix some of the issues that have happened. The Weelaunee discussion goes straight to the point. Here's an opportunity to do some master planning, and we may lose that opportunity going forward if we wait too long or we don't actually put some things in place. And it's another example of, we slow walk things, and what will happen if we're not careful is Weelaunee will turn into what a lot of the pocket developments in the Northeast have been, which were development-driven initiatives.
Thank you. Commissioner Desloge, staying with you, and this is a question specifically for you, and then I've got one for Mr. Welch. You've received many campaign contributions that appear to be bundled by large developers, often with business before the county commission. Do developers get a bigger say in who gets elected because of the amount of money they're able to donate through multiple corporations? And what do you think they get for their money?
So the first answer is, do they get special treatment? No. The limit is $250 per entity. And so to say that one business who's doing multiple developments is somehow going to be handicapped, these are the people that are paying a large majority of the taxes. They get access as anybody else does, but it doesn't matter whether you wrote me a campaign check or called me a bad name. My phone rings all the time, and my office is always open, and there is no difference in the way people get treated.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, we're not seeing those kind of contributions on your donor list. Have they not been offered, or have you refused? Would you accept those donations if they were offered?
They have not been offered to me. I mean, Mr. Desloge sort of commands a lot of that money from the development community, and I've got over 300 donations, and those are mostly my friends and neighbors and people who believe in me and trust me. And I think about 75% of them are Republicans. So I would not accept those monies because, again, I think that even though it's legal, I think it sends the wrong message. It sends the message that if I can bundle up, money to kind of get over the $250 per entity limit by bundling 10 or 20 entities, normal people can't do that. So for me to get $250 from 10 or 20 people is very difficult, and it sends a whole different message than if I get $250 from 10 or 20 LLCs controlled by the same person.
All right. We are going to the League of Women Voters for our last question before I'm going to let you all close and speak directly to voters. Christine?
Okay, beginning with you, Mr. Welch. Leon County has seen the increase in density, but not the corresponding provision of improved sidewalks, bike paths, and transit. What do you think the commission should do to encourage walking, cycling, and transit?
You've got 1 minute.
Thank you. I think that we have to invest in multimodal transportation and developments that support that kind of stuff. I mean, if we're going to continue again to push development out into the Northeast, nobody's riding a bicycle downtown from Weelaunee. Nobody's going to be taking a bus or a train or any other multimodal transportation from Weelaunee. Nobody's walking from Weelaunee. And so it all depends on where we target development. We have to encourage development in parts of town that contribute to better outcomes for the entire community and the entire county. Northeast Tallahassee, as is admitted, is a development mess. The quality of life of residents in Northeast Tallahassee has been substantially negatively impacted by constant development, which is going on right now. Right now, it is going on the right side of the road and the left side of the road. It's a real mess. And there's no way, all it's going to do is contribute to traffic, which is already a mess in Northeast Tallahassee. Thomasville Road and Bannerman Road looks like Orlando or Atlanta at rush hour. And that's just unacceptable. And that's why we live in Tallahassee. So we don't have to live in Orlando or Atlanta, where we have all this traffic for hours at a time and no sidewalks and no infrastructure. So I think that all comes back to where we direct development.
All right. Commissioner Desloge, same question.
Sure. So I helped coin the term Tallahassee. We've got better than 700 miles of bike and trails in our community. I will tell you that within Blueprint, every project of any significance has absolutely a sidewalk and or a trail component to it. We have linked together the schools and the parks and the neighborhoods. I will tell you that all of the Weelaunee thing is interlinked, and the plans are to actually have a lot of open space and a trail system that connects throughout Weelaunee to the rest of the community. So we're getting smarter as we go down this road. And there are lots of opportunities like Orchard Pond, where we picked up a bike pedestrian trail, a 5-mile bike pedestrian trail as a result of the landowner putting in the toll road, which we see out there today. So there's a lot of things we can do as we go forward in an effort to try and make the community more bikeable and more walkable. And if anybody's a proponent of that, it's me.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, you made it to the end, and we are like almost scarily on time. So well done for keeping the answers brief and things moving along. This is your chance now to speak directly to voters. You can have a minute and a half. Feel free to give your website. Commissioner Desloge, you'll start here on this.
Thanks. Well, I ran for office initially, and I run for office this time because Tallahassee's been good to me and my family. I love the community. I was born in TMH, went to Blessed Sacrament, went to Leon High School, went to Florida State. And so I'm a product. My parents still live in the house I grew up in Benton Hills, my 94-year-old father and my 90-year-old mother. Tallahassee has been great to me, and this is my way of giving back. I think public service is at its end, the highest form of community activism. And frankly, we've had a good run. I'm proud of the record I've got for the last 14 years. I think the county, and I can tell you from having been around the country and met with county commissioners in just about every state in the country and most of the counties in Florida, we do a good job. Perfect, no, but awfully good. And I'm proud of the record I've had. We've got a budget that is less today than when I walked in here 14 years ago. We have never laid off people. We have a quality of life. We have one of the lowest employees per constituent ratio and one of the lowest budget per constituent ratio in the state. We measure ourselves annually. We've got one of the leanest and most effective workforces. And the quality of life in Tallahassee is that way because we invest in the extra things, Cascades Park, the increase of the Capitol Circle widening around the community, the trail system that we've developed. We could go on and on about the things we've done to help make Tallahassee the kind of place where people want to move to, and they want to bring their families here, and they want to retire here, and they want to build their companies, grow their companies. So I love the community, and the only reason I'm doing this is in an effort to give back. And I look at the record for the last 14 years, and I'm proud of what we've done and proud of what we've built. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Welch, you have the last word to take us out.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I'm running for the county commission, frankly, because Mr. Desloge has been on there for 14 years without an opponent, and I think that's a long time. I don't think the status quo is serving us anymore, specifically in Northeast Tallahassee. I appreciate Mr. Desloge's service. I think that his tenure on the county commission has been very good for him. I just don't know how good it's been for the folks in Northeast Tallahassee, specifically over the last couple of years, where we see increased development, we see a lot of traffic. We don't see a lot of recreational infrastructure or transportation infrastructure or environmental infrastructure. We just see a lot of developers getting to turn dirt and do what they want. And so I'm in this race because I want to fight for our Northeast families, our Northeast community, our Northeast neighborhoods, who I think have been left behind. I don't think that we have an advocate in local government. I don't think that we get engagement. We don't get responsiveness. And I'm just offering myself up to remedy that. I live in Northeast Tallahassee, and I'm impacted by all of these things that I talk about. This is where I've invested financially and emotionally with my family. And I think it's very important that we have somebody in local government that's advocating for our side of town. And I agree that, we have to help everybody in the whole community, but Northeast Tallahassee has to be involved in that conversation. And currently we're just not. So I would appreciate any support I can get. If you're a Northeast Tallahassee voter, I think you agree it's probably time for a change. It's time for a fresh perspective. It's time for a renewed energy, a commitment to our families. You can find more information about my campaign at welchforleon.com. And I have a Facebook page, Welch for Leon County.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we've done it. I want to thank the candidates. I want to thank the League of Women Voters. I want to thank the audience for joining us today. Our next forum will be at 1 p.m. Thursday with the candidates for Leon County Commission at Large, and our special election guide prints on Sunday, October 4th. In the meanwhile, check out tallahassee.com/elections for the latest on this and all the races and issues on the ballot. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day.